Welcome to Wheelock's Latin, Chapter 21. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at the passive voice present system for the third, fourth, and third IO conjugation verbs. We'll also be looking at how to form the infinitives for these verbs. All right, so if you remember, when we learned the passive voice for the present system first and second conjugation verbs, just a little review, the endings for present tense were are, ris, ter, mer, mini, inter. The imperfect endings were bar, baris, bater, bamer, bamini, banter. And the future tense endings were bor, baris, bitter, bimmer, bimini, bunter. So those are the passive endings for the present system for first and second conjugation. Now, just as in the active voice, the third, fourth, and third IO act just a little bit differently than the first and second conjugation verbs in how the connecting vowel from the second principal part, it plays out in the different tenses, but it also is different in the future. And so let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. So again, this is present system, passive voice for third, fourth conjugation verbs. All right, so here are the endings again. Are, ris, ter, mer, mini, inter for the present tense. That's going to be exactly the same. That's not going to change. For imperfect, again, not going to change. Bar, baris, bater, bamer, bamini, banter. Now, here is where third and fourth and third IO are different. We're not going to use the bor, baris, bitter, bimmer, bimini, bunter endings that first and second conjugation use. Here's our note bene. Remember that in third and fourth conjugation, we have a future rule that you use the present tense endings. So here we've got are, ris, ter, mer, mini, inter, just like in the present tense. So what distinguishes the difference between the two? It's the vowel shifts. And so we'll look at that in a little bit more detail for each of the conjugations. So as a quick reminder, here are the paradigm verbs for each of the conjugations. We've already looked at first and second conjugation, lado, ladari, and moneo, moneri. Right now we're going to be looking at third conjugation, ago, ageri, fourth conjugation, adao, aderi, and third IO, kapao, kaperi. And if you'll remember, what we've said before is that third conjugation has some characteristics like third conjugation, but they also have some characteristics like fourth conjugation. And we'll see how this plays out in the different verbs. Okay, so let's look at ago, ageri, egi, actum. This is our paradigm verb for third conjugation. So if we're going to take our endings for present tense, passive voice that we've already learned, are, ris, ter, mer, mini, inter. Now, the first thing you're going to do is for first person singular, you're just going to take the first principal part, ago, and just bring it right down to the first person singular and put the R ending on there, giving you agor. Now, standard policy has always been we're going to take the second principal part, drop the RE infinitive ending off, leaving you your stem AGE. But if you remember, what makes third conjugation a little bit different is that short E is going to convert to an I here. So we're going to end up with an AGI stem on all of these plus your endings. Now we have something a little bit different here in the passive voice that we don't have an active. Right here in second person singular, the I is actually going to be an E. It's going to stay an E here, only in second person singular. And I know what you're thinking. Latin with all of these exceptions to the rules. I know. I'm sorry, but you just have to learn this one. Second person singular is going to stay with the E. The rest will have the characteristic shift from the short E to an I plus the ending. So this is what it'll look like. That'll now become ageris. So it's agor. Again, we're going to take the first principal part, ago, and add the R ending, so agor. And then ageris, the AGE, comes straight over from the second principal part. The rest of the endings converts that short I like we saw in the active voice. So ageris, ageter, agamer, agamini. And if you remember, third person plural, it's not the I. Again, this was already something different, but it happens here as well. It's unique. It is a U on our connecting vowel, so agunter. So if you remember in the present tense, active voice, it was ago, agis, agit, agimus, agitus, agunt. Here it's agor, ageris, agiter, agamur, agamini, agunter. So really, this is no different than the active voice, I should say, except you've got passive endings, and the only other unique thing is a second person singular present. We're going to have an E instead of an I. So that's present tense. And if you look how we translate this for passive voice present tense, it's I am driven, or you could say I am being driven. You are driven, he, she, it is driven. We are driven, you all are being driven, or you all are driven, and they are driven. So this is the passive present tense for I go. Let's look at the imperfect tense. There we go. Now, if you remember, our endings for passive imperfect were bar, baris, bater, bomber, bomini, banter. And so we're going to take that second principal part, ageri, drop the RE infinitive ending. So we're going to have age, age, and that age becomes an age with a macron, that long mark. So it's agebar, agebaris, agebator, agebamer, agebameni, agebanter. So this is the imperfect. It's pretty much straightforward, what you'd expect. This is exactly what we saw in the active voice, imperfect, age plus your endings. And the translation is I was being driven, you were being driven, etc. Now, what about future tense? Now, again, this is where third conjugation wildly differentiates with the first and second conjugation. We don't use the future tense endings that we learned for first and second conjugation. We learned bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt. And in the passive, we learned bor, beris, bitter, bimmer, bimini, bunter. But here, we're going to not use the future tense endings, but we use the present tense endings. If you'll remember, there we go, age. Let me put this nota bene real quick. Nota bene, remember the third and fourth conjugation future rule, which is you use the present tense endings. So we've got our aris ter, mer, mini, inter. That second principal part stem, age, comes over, and we will see that age all the way through except the first person singular. You can see there I've highlighted it pink here. It's an A, and we already saw that in the active voice. Remember, it was agam, ages, aget, agemus, agetis, agent. Well, here it's agar, and we're using the passive endings here. Agar, ageris, ageter, agemer, agemini, agenter. Not a long mark, no macron over the third person plural E, agenter. As you remember, no long mark before an NT anywhere in the word. So the translation here, I will be driven, you will be driven, he, she, it will be driven, etc. So this is future tense. So again, if you learned how to do third conjugation and the uniqueness of third conjugation in the active voice, then here the passive voice won't have too many problems. You've already learned the passive endings for first and second conjugation, and we're just going to apply both these two things, the oddities of third conjugation and the new passive endings, and you should be just fine. Again, the only difference was, get that nota bene to go away. There we go. The only difference was that second person singular in the present tense. Now, I do want you to notice this. Here's something very unique here. In the second person singular, since it did not become an I but changed an E, you have ageris, ageris. But notice in the future, it's ageris. The only difference here is in the future singular, you have a macron over the E. So it's ageris as opposed to the present tense, which is ageris. So this is one of those places that noting the macrons will be useful in differentiating between the words, whether it's present tense or future tense in this case. The rest of the forms, though, are going to be exactly as you'd expect them. All right, so let's take a look. Yes, only difference between, there we go, present and future second person singular is the macron in the future. All right, so very good. Now let's look at fourth conjugation. Let's check that out. Here is our fourth conjugation paradigm verb, audeo, auderi, audewi, auditum. And again, we're going to take the audeo, first principal part, and bring it straight down. Boom. Add the R ending, the first person singular present tense ending for passive voice. Audior. And then we're going to take the second principal part, the infinitive, drop the RE infinitive ending. That leaves you the stem, AUDI, bring it right down. And to that, we add our endings, arister, mer, mini, inter. But I want you to notice the vowels here. It is an I all the way through, except third person plural. If you remember, we had a U here for third conjugation. We had a U here for fourth conjugation, also in the active voice, but it's audiunter. We saw this in the active voice. You had an IU. Well, you have the IU here as well, audiunter. So audior, audieris, auditor, audimer, audimini, audiunter. Translation, I am being heard, you are being heard, etc. Let's look at the imperfect. It's going to be just like we'd expect. We're going to take that AUDI infinitive, drop the infinitive ending from the second principal part, and it's AUDI, but notice we're going to add the E here, and we already saw this, so it's AUDIE. We have an IE vowel connection throughout all the forms here in the imperfect, and we add the imperfect passive endings. Bar, baris, bater, bomber, bomini, banter. So you end up with audia bar, audia baris, audia bater, audia bomber, audia bomini, audia banter. I was heard, you were heard, he was heard, etc. Future tense. All right. Now remember, fourth conjugation acts just like third conjugation here. They both take the present tense endings. So we have the arister, mer, mini, inter. And again, we take that second principal part, stem, drop the infinitive ending. So we have AUDI. And for the most of the forms here in the future, it's an AUDIE, except again, that first person singular, it's actually an A. You got to remember that. In the active voice, it was audiam, but here it's audiar. But the rest of the forms, it is going to be IE, audieris. There it is, audieris, audiatur, audiamer, audiamini, audienter. I will be heard, you will be heard, he will be heard, etc. All right, so that's third conjugation, fourth conjugation. What about third IO? Kappa-o, kaperi, kepi, kaptum. Now, if you remember, I've told you, third IO is an interesting conjugation. It has some aspects that are like third conjugation, but they have some aspects that are like fourth conjugation. It's like a little kid that has some characteristics, facial characteristics, looks a little bit like dad, and yet sometimes looks a little bit like mom. Well, this is the same thing here. This is like third conjugation is kind of like the child to the third and fourth conjugation. So we'll point out these characteristics where sometimes it's like mama and sometimes it's like papa. So here we go. We're going to take the kappa-o. Just like fourth conjugation, it's audio. There's an IO there. Kappa-o is the same way. This is kind of like a fourth conjugation verb. So it's kappa-o. We're going to take that whole thing, bring it straight down, and add the R present tense ending, kapior. Now we're going to take the kaperi. Notice that this looks like third conjugation. It's got that short E. C-A-P-E is going to be our stem, but it converts to an I, if you'll remember. So it's C-A-P-I-R-I-S. Except this is just like third conjugation where second person singular actually retains that short E, so it ends up being caperes. But the rest of the forms are just like you would expect. Capitur, capimer, capimini. And again, this one, it's like fourth conjugation rather. It has the I and the U. Capiunter. So this one, it's like fourth conjugation. So here in the second person singular, you had a characteristic like third conjugation, and in third person plural, we've got a characteristic like fourth conjugation. Caperis, capitur, capimer, capimini, capiunter. I am taken, you are taken, etc. Now, imperfect, it's going to be just like fourth conjugation. We're going to have that second principal part, stem, C-A-P-E, but it's going to be C-A-P-I-E. I-E, just like fourth conjugation. Audi e bar. Well, here it's copy e bar, copy a baris, copy a bater, copy a bomber, copy a bomini, copy a banter. And again, translations, I was taken, you were taken, etc. So here, the forms are exactly like fourth conjugation. Just take that copy e, C-A-P-I-E, all the way through all six forms and add your passive imperfect endings. What about future? Again, just like third and fourth conjugation both, we're going to use present tense endings, are, ris, ter, mer, many, inter. Again, our stem is going to be CAPIE for most of the forms. There you go. Except, again, first person singular, it's that A, retains that A, or changes to an A. So capiar, capieris, capieter, capiemer, capiamini, capienter. I will be taken, you will be taken, etc. So those are the forms for third, fourth, and third IO conjugation. Now, here's another chart, just another way of looking at it. This is all of the conjugations and their connecting vowels. This is just another way to look at it. So you can sort of see this side by side. In present tense, you have OR, IOR in fourth, and third IO, IOR. So you can see how they're similar to one another and where they're different. Second person singular present, you have eris, iris, eris. You can see that third and third IO are just like. Then you can see in third singular, they're all iter, except the fourth conjugation has a long I. The first person plural, they're all immer, again, that long I in fourth conjugation, and then emini, all the way across. And again, long mark, macron, in second person plural for fourth conjugation. And then you've got unter, except e unter for fourth and third IO, e unter. Looking at imperfect, you got ebar, iabar, and iabar. You can see third IO and fourth are exactly alike in all the forms. Iebar, iebar, iebaris, iebaris, etc. Third conjugation is just ebar, ebaris, ebater. So you notice that IE is characteristic of the imperfect for fourth and third IO. And then for the future, you've got R, AR, and then ER, ER. That IAR in fourth and third IO. And again, for fourth and third IO, they have the IE all the way down. Third conjugation only has an E all the way down. So you can see all those, and when you see them side by side, it's kind of a little bit helpful here. I'm going to go ahead and take the chart and put passive and active endings together here. You can see them all. Present tense system for active voice, OST, mustisent, bombas bot, bombas batis bont for imperfect. I've got future, I got two columns there for first and second conjugation, the bo, bis, bit, bimis, bitis, bunt. And again, third, fourth, and third IO, you use the present tense ending, so back to OST, mustisent. Of course, your perfect system, you use your third principal part, but your endings are e, isti, it, imus, istis, arunt. This is for all conjugations. Pluperfect, aram, aras, arat, aramus, aratus, arant. And for future perfect, aro, aris, arit, arimus, aritis, arent. Back down to the passive voice, which we've just got through learning. Present tense, all conjugations. Ar, ris, ter, mer, many, inter. Imperfect. Bar, baris, bater. Bomber, bomini, banter. Now again, two columns for future. You got first and second. Bor, baris, bitter. Bimmer, bimini, bunter. Third, fourth, and third IO use the present endings. Ar, ris, ter, mer, many, inter. And the perfect system, of course, use the fourth principal part plus a form of sum for perfect, or a form of aram for pluperfect, and a form of aro for future perfect. And so that's just a way of, I guess I was supposed to walk my way through it here as I did these endings. That's all right. There we go. Now this next chart may be a little bit more complicated, but just one more way of looking at it. Some people may find this helpful, some may not. But this is sort of like I've color-coded it here. Got the present system, and I've got the actual vowels and the endings side by side here. So again, the endings for present tense, active voice, OST, mustisent, but you can see the vowels for first, second, third, fourth, and third IO. You can see the same thing for the imperfect. Then you can see the future, which I've, again, divided into the first and second, which has different endings than the endings for the third, fourth, and third IO. And then I did the same thing for passive. So this may or may not be helpful for you, but for some people it might be. Feel free to, pause it here and sort of examine these endings and these vowels. And sometimes it's helpful to see the big picture and see how things are similar and then see how they're different. Now we're almost done here. Let's take a look. One last thing here. Let's look at the infinitives for third and fourth conjugation and third IO in the passive. So if you remember, for first and second conjugation, we just simply took the laudari and we change that E to an I to make it a passive. Instead of to praise, it's to be praised. And moneri, again, we take that E and change it to a long I, and so it's moneri, and it's to be warned. Well, what do we do for third, fourth, and third AO? Here we go. So for third conjugation, we have agere. Again, that's the second principal part, so it's to lead or to drive. But for the passive, we drop the infinitive ending altogether, and the connecting vowel becomes an I, a long I. So it's agi. All right. Again, nota bene, third and third IO verbs drop the RE infinitive endings, and the E shifts to an I. So we were going to see an I here, but we're going to drop the RE. Fourth conjugation functions exactly how you'd expect. Audiri, that E becomes an I. So audiri, to hear and to be heard. And then lastly, capere is going to act just like third conjugation. You're going to drop the RE, and we're going to change the E to a long I. So capi, to take or to capture, or passive to be taken or to be captured. So that's how you do the infinitives for passive for these three conjugations. Don't forget to study your vocabulary. You will have a quiz later on. We'll be working on all this on Tuesday. Have a good day.